Hey. Thank you so much, Pioneer Works. This is amazing. Okay. I was a horny kid. Once when I was 5, my mom, she's here, my mom was telling my little sister not to touch her crotch in public when I interrupted, adding, "You just have to do it like this so nobody notices." I walked over to a door frame, pressed my little pelvis into its corner, and started rubbing my crotch side to side. "I do it all the time," I said. I was the one who told all my friends how babies are made, whether they asked me or not. I asked the people sitting in the booth behind us at the diner and the guy at the photo developing counter at Walgreens if they knew that boys had penises and girls had vaginas. Fake news, turns out. In middle school at friends' houses, I would dig around in their parents' drawers looking for dildos just to stare at them. I started having sex when I was 15, a lot. Now I'm 30 and I hump door frames way less often. But I do still talk about sex and pussies all the time, especially now that I've spent the last 4.5 years creating first Pussypedia.net and then this book. This is something I never imagined for my life. I studied urban planning, made a career writing in emojis, and was working as a freelance journalist, researcher, and millennial salad internet consultant, dealing in buzzwords like narratives and content, when one day in 2016, I Googled, "Can all women squirt?" My search yielded what you might expect: wildly contradictory information, pseudoscience filled with spelling errors, videos for men about how to make cis women squirt. Frustrated, I turned to medical journal articles, and bam, I got sucked into a vortex that I would never get out of. I could barely understand anything. I had to look up the definition of almost every word, and then look up almost every word in those definitions, but what I was finding was really blowing my mind. Like, there's only one type of orgasm, and my bladder is where? I stayed up the whole night reading and studying diagrams. Why the hell had I lived my entire life without so much crucial information about my body? Why did I not know how exquisitely normal I was? And why was it so hard for someone without a medical background to access this information? I was furious that so many people with pussies waste precious mental space and time feeling inadequate or excessive or gross, or at least that I had. My journey from unself-consciously horny kindergartner to unself-consciously horny adult was long and fucked up, and honestly, is still not over. I spent most of it mortified by my body, until at least the beginning of high school. In new social situations, I would walk around with my arms crossed over my belly to hide it. Shopping for clothes almost always left me crying. I didn't wear a bikini until like 3 years ago. I didn't participate in a single sport and often sat out PE because I was so embarrassed about the bizarre way I move my body. My best friend and husband agree that I still walk like a drunk toddler. I was disgusted by the discharge in my panties. I was disgusted by my frequent yeast infections, which were probably caused by my habit of scrubbing between my inner labia with soap, trying desperately to be less disgusting. No soap in the crack, you guys, none. No soap in the crack. I was so disgusted by my body that I didn't trust it to keep me alive, which is probably why I never learned to drive or swim. And my body would do things that would validate my distrust, like when I was 14 and one side of my labia grew into its adult form a full 6 months before the other. Even after the same size again, I felt stinging shame just for their very existence. And God, did I feel shame for being horny. So much. It felt like trying really hard at a game and always losing. Finally learning about my body was like finding out that my opponent had been cheating the whole time. The patriarchy has a lot of tricks for making people with pussies feel like shit. Suppressing information and conversation about our bodies is one of them. Knowledge is power, and pussy knowledge is tragically hard to come by. I say tragically because ignorance and ensuing shame are just phase 1 of the patriarchy's evil plan to waste your motherfucking time.
Amazing. This is Zoe Mendelson, everybody. I'm Molly Webster, and our names are above us on this card image, but Zoe and I are actually going to switch seats because our hair falls over our eyes, and it's actually better if we're in opposite seats. You just had to set the scene there.
Also, I'm gonna unbutton my pants, and I would like to invite everybody else who would like to unbutton their pants to unbutton.
Which I fully endorse, but I have stretchy pants on. I came fully prepared. So there's so many things that are captured in those first 2 pages, like the humor of the book, the things the book's gonna cover, like shame and body parts and sex and engaging in sex and consent. Maybe we can start with just what made you Google squirting in the first place. There's a story.
I was arguing with my ex-boyfriend about whether or not all women can squirt, because he was like, everyone I've been with can do it, you can too. And I was like, I don't think so. I would really like to get back to enjoying sex now, so I Googled it, as one does.
And tell me about the trove of the internet that it brought you to, and when you actually started finding real answers or things that felt like clear answers to you about your body and squirting and what your answer to your ex-boyfriend would be.
Okay, well, that question's unanswerable because it's very hard to prove the negative cases. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't really prove that somebody can't squirt. And also, like, anecdotally, I've heard a lot of people talk about these squirt shops that they've gone to where, like, somebody teaches all of the people with pussies there how to squirt, and, like, supposedly everybody squirts. But I guess I was reading, it started with just trying to figure out where my bladder was, because I was reading, like, the study about how the squirt, like, they observed the bladder, and it filled up before and it emptied after, so it did come from the bladder, and I was like, but it talked about the relationship sort of spatially between the bladder and the vagina. I was like, where is my bladder? So I started looking at some 2D images, and that's really hard still to understand because, like, these things are also interlocking, and like the way they are arranged is very, like a puzzle. Like,
yeah.
So seeing a 2D image still is really hard, so I started looking for 3D images, and like when I found one, I was like, oh, wait, what's that? And what is that thing?
And you're like, I've been living in this body for so long, and I have no idea about any of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to actually show, I think we have a picture. I'm just going to click to it of all the different parts.
That's the outside parts.
That's as close as we could get in this moment. This is done by, can you tell us about the illustrator on the book? Because one of the cool things about the book is really well written, super science heavy, and then has these amazing illustrations.
Maria Conejo is one of my best friends, and she can't be here because this country is racist and doesn't let Mexican people come here unless they apply for a visa and show that they have enough money in their bank accounts. So, I mean, all sorts of stuff. But yeah, she's not here, and I wish she was here, and I miss her, and she's a genius.
Let's look at, this is one of my favorites. You said that this is Maria's favorite image.
This is Maria's favorite, and I think that her goal with this was just to make it look joyous, and I think she did. You know, I think this is such a shameless image, such a joyful image. It's a loving image. Like, I think the way that the little heart ring on the finger, and also like the eye on the other finger, to me is like, no, like we're not turning away from this, we're looking at it. I've never talked to her about that. I don't know if that was her intention, but I do know this is her favorite one.
And how did you two end up getting paired on the book?
She dated my brother, and that was almost 10 years ago, and I was coming to Mexico City traveling with my sister after that, and he asked her if she would host us, and she said yes, and we made friends, and she was the only person I knew when I moved to Mexico City a year later, and we wanted to collaborate, and we got stoned and thought of a lot of really bad ideas, and then this one came along, and we were like, yeah, that one, that'll work.
I love that. And the title, Pussypedia, the taking back of the word pussy, is something you talk about in the book. Do you want to sort of like define it for those of us who haven't read the book yet?
Yeah, so we were trying to name the project like not long after, I mean, it was the website first, and so it wasn't long after the grab 'em by the pussy moment, and it was kind of like, you know, like he can't have that word. That can't be his word. And also because vagina is just like the canal, and Sophia Wallace is here. I don't know.
Can we have a woo, Sophia Wallace?
Sophia, like, I went to go work on an art piece of Sophia's in Zacatecas, and I kept calling it a vagina altar, but it was a clitoris altar, and she was like, stop, like, this is serious. And it kind of like, I was like, oh my God, no, this is serious. Like, it hit me, like, we can't call the whole thing a vagina. Like, the clitoris isn't the vagina. Like, also, vagina means sheath, which is like sword holder. Like, I don't want to call my whole shit like that thing a penis goes in. And I also thought it was problematic that we don't want to like call it the vulva either, because like that doesn't include the internal clitoris. And like, yeah, we needed a more inclusive word. And so pussy doesn't have like a prior scientific definition, so it's a blank state, and we use it to mean like all the parts, you know, uterus, bladder, urethra, and maybe some testes, because some intersex people have like pussies with testes, and also the anus and the rectum, because like they have a big part to play, and it all works together. And so it's sort of like, what if we only had words for like foot, ankle, shin, calf, thigh, and we didn't have a word for leg? Like, a leg works as a unit to help you walk, and your pussy also works as a unit to do a whole lot of amazing things.
Get it, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's just somewhat ungendered. Like, it is gendered slightly, but I feel like it's like the furthest from gender you can maybe get.
Yeah, I mean, we felt like it was a blank slate. Like, it didn't have so many, it had its own connotations, but like the way we were going to be using it was going to be new. So, I mean, yeah. Also, like, it's a bad word, which is fun. So, you know, I like that people might think about why it's a jarring word.
Yeah.
Like, it's not jarring because it's a swear word. Fuck is also a swear word, but we say fuck and hear fuck all the time without getting like, you know, like, you don't feel as much. And the reason you feel it when someone says pussy is because it means vagina, and vagina being invoked embarrasses people.
On the way here, I was driving, and I actually yelled at another car from my car, and I was like, "Don't be such a pussy!" And then I thought, "Oh my God, this is ironic. I'm going to this event, and I'm already not treating this word the way I would want it to be treated." It's true. I'll admit that here.
I mean, it's kind of even, because like we say dick that way too, like, oh, like such a, he's a dick or whatever, like. Maybe like they cancel each other out and it's all okay.
I love it. Great, good. Thank you for that absolution. There is, I mean, one of the things this book does is there's so much humor in it and so many personal stories, but behind all of that is just like science, 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 science. And I'm curious, I think you told me that before this, it's not like you were like, I'm a scientist or a science journalist, and when you started flipping through those papers, like the scientific articles, I think you were like, I don't know what the fuck this says. And so maybe you could tell me about like starting to wade into the world of science and what made you go to that place, because I'm sure there's a lot of places you could have gone to make the book.
It was two feelings. Like, one of them was like, well, someone has to do this because everything else is like not agreeing and like conflating concepts, and like I wanted to offer something that wasn't what was already there. Like I wanted to give something that would have better answers. So it's like I had to, and like also because other people I care about were investing so much time in the project. Like I had to do a good job.
I like it. What was it like to start? Like one of the things you said to me when we were preparing for like this talk, you said like one of your objectives was to democratize science. And I wonder what that means and when you realized you actually had that objective.
Well, that was like the beginning, the first moment, because I was reading those studies, and like when I started getting what they were saying, I was like, oh my God, it's not fair that it's so hard to read this, and it's so hard to like get actual information. That's not fair. So I wanted to do that from sort of the first moment, but it didn't develop till later that I was like, Jackie Yan is also here. I don't know where you are. But Jackie taught me a lot about like how to do good research and like how to fact check and how to assess a study, you know, for its merits. And like I was like, oh, this is so cool, this is so important, and like these skills would be valuable to people outside of this realm and in like so many areas of life, especially in this like moment where information, you know, is out of like sort of this like crazy post-truth moment where we need to all be better researchers and better consumers of information. And those skills that Jackie taught me felt so applicable to that, and I was like, oh, like I want this book to help other people learn how I did this research. So also, hopefully, they could expect of other things they were reading some transparency around where did you get this information, how did you come to these conclusions. Like a lot of things state things with certainty or like have a clean narrative, have like a conclusion, but there's so few facts in science. Like Jackie taught me a lot about how to state things delicately so that you weren't like overstating a conclusion, and like that felt very profound.
Well, there's like a lot of parts of the book, because like the book goes through different things. There's like reproduction, hormones, menstruation, just all the different parts, sex acts, masturbation, that kind of thing. And you actually have a number of parts in the book. I'm thinking of things having to do with birth control or hormones, where you say like, there's no answer to this. Like I'm just gonna end it here because I've sort of showed you why some of these studies suck and then why other ones are better, and I'm out. And I that was really interesting.
Yeah, I want people to get used to that. It would be better. All information would be better if, you know, as like having a background as a freelance journalist, and like there's like a skill you develop, which is pitching to editors online, and that's the opposite skill. And so like
you're like, I have a story, and the story has a beginning, middle, and end, and you're gonna believe it. Yeah.
Or like this study came out and it says blank, therefore blank is true.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I wanted to get people used to like not having that, because if you're forced to sort of consider like a whole landscape of information, like that's just a better understanding. Like you don't need a conclusion, you need to like understand, you don't need a fact, you need to understand like everything around it, you know, and we don't.
I mean, it's a long book. It's very interesting, so you should always read it. But it's you were saying that it was like ballooned even more than you imagined, and I was thinking, God, how do you pick which things to go into? You know, like PMS as opposed to, gosh, I don't even know, like some other area of, you know, that fits into the kind of like insight, because it in a sense is like an encyclopedia. And so I just wondered, like, did you follow some inner gut instinct of like most interesting to you, or were there things where you're like, we have to get this information out to the public, you know?
There were things I learned over the course of making the website that I was like, oh my God, we need to get this out. And there were things I found during the course of the book that I was like, whoa, okay, that's awesome. I'm gonna put that in. And again, Jackie, she made a content outline for the book and was like, this is important, you need to cover these topics. Yeah. Yeah.
What was one of the most like, oh my gosh, this is important, I have to get that in?
Like, a lot of information about the urethral sponge.
Have you guys ever heard of a urethral sponge? We got one woo. It was like with when I made the pussy comment. That same person. Yeah. What? Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah.
Good. Great. She's gonna tell us about the urethral sponge.
Okay, so like in a penis, the urethra is surrounded by erectile tissue, like a tube of it. That's like what a penis is. But also our urethras are covered in your erectile tissue, just like a penis. And it goes through, it's parallel to the vagina. Actually, most images everywhere of the anatomy of a pussy, you see the vagina and the urethra as parallel separate tubes, almost every single image. But in fact, the urethra is embedded on one side along the vagina, and then the urethral sponge covers it around on other sides of it. So like an 8, like if you were to see a cross-section. And inside of the erectile tissue, there's a bunch of glands called the periurethral glands, which you may have heard of, called the Skene's glands. Mm-hmm. And they produce ejaculate. And it's a pleasure-producing thing. It's between the two bulbs of the clitoris, and it's very, very much attached to the clitoris by a bunch of nerves. So it stimulates the clitoris. First of all, erectile tissue is pleasure-producing tissue on its own, but it also stimulates the clitoris, and that's why the G-spot exists. And, you know, maybe a month before I started, Cosmo published an article called "The G-spot Does Not Exist," and it was like this horrible article, this mea culpa, being like, oh, we're really sorry, we said that it was real. There's these studies now that say it's not real, and we're really sorry about all this. But of course, it's super real. And in fact, it's called the G-spot. It's named after Ernst Grafenberg, who didn't name it after himself. He's not one of those assholes. He described it, and he described exactly what it was from the very first mention of it, from the very first paper. He said it's this erectile tissue around the urethra. It produces pleasure. It's connected to the clitoris. And then, there's this thing in pussy science, which I think is a huge way that, gender narratives influence the way we do research, where, the scientists aren't reading each other's work, which is, unthinkable. So a few studies a few years ago got funded and carried out in which they went into vaginas looking for the G-spot. 3 studies.
And you're
How
like,
much
I'm
money?
staring at a diagram that already has
Yeah,
shown.
they like didn't go back and read G's paper about what he said this spot
the
was.
OGG. Yeah.
Yeah. Or Beverly Whipple, the like amazing neuroscientist who like established female ejaculation as a thing. Like she also like in her wildly popular book, The G-Spot, described exactly what it was. And so, I mean, for different people, it's like varying degrees of sensitive, but it's why a vaginal orgasm is still a clitoral orgasm.
Oh, right, because one of the things you say in the book, and what you said in the intro, is like there's only one type of orgasm. And you're like, oh, it's all connected.
It's all connected. It's just like stimulating the clit through the vagina. But there's like infinite types of orgasms.
Well, it's also interesting because I think even when we first started talking about it, I kept attaching all pleasure to the clitoris and was like, oh, the urethra is just what I pee out of. I don't really care about that. And then you were like, no, there's the sponge thing that we're going to tell you about. Very cool. I do think you're pointing at one of the things. I remember when I was doing gonads, we were thinking about sort of doing like a history of science story on just like reproduction and how the story of it's been told over time. And one of the things that I found really interesting was the clit was like discovered and lost like 3 times in history, where it was like, oh, there's this thing, it's like a penis, and then it was like,
no,
everyone,
we're not going to talk about that.
Everyone forgot about it, and then like another guy came along, and like 100 years later, and was like, hey, there's this thing, it's like a penis, and you're sort of pointing at that even like happening now, where people are.
Yeah. Exactly. One of my favorite texts from one of the guys that like rediscovered the clitoris is he wrote like, I'm very confused about why nobody saw this organ. It's very perceptible to sight and touch.
And I'm like, I guess I imagine a couple people who have seen this organ. Maybe half the population, at least.
But yes, in a way it is happening again. I mean, Masters and Johnson saw a lot of women ejaculate and were like, no, they wrote like, female ejaculation does not exist. This idea comes from romance novels, they said. Like, and it's like, oh my God, what else is it gonna take? And I asked Beverly Whipple when I interviewed her, like, why did you have to do like 7 studies to prove that pussies ejaculate? When so many pussies ejaculate. Like, it just seems like so weird, you know, and I was trying to get her to talk about, like, oh, well, like, gender narratives, they don't want to, like, admit it, you know, they don't want us to be biologically equal, which I still think is true, but she made a way cooler point, which was like, no, because women were coming into my clinic saying they were peeing during sex. So if you don't have the idea that you can ejaculate and like liquid gushes out of your pussy during sex, you're like, oh my God, I peed. You know, so it's just another cool example of how our narratives inform our empirical observations.
Right. You said that writing the book, it's interesting because there's a whole online world of Pussypedia. If you haven't seen it, it's really great. And at your fingertips the minute you leave. And then the book. You said that sort of being involved in this project really changed your relationship with your body.
Yeah.
How so?
I mean, if you just like immerse yourself in it's like if you say a word a lot of times and it starts to sound weird. Like you ever said a word over and over and over to yourself.
Yeah.
Well, that's such a bizarre thing. Like it sort of loses its like previous like box. Or something, like its associations and like the feelings associated with it, and like by like, okay, I literally studied discharge for like 3 weeks, like all day, every day. Like,
when were you like, today is my last discharge day, I think I've got this down?
It's just like, you just get
you just
over
became
it.
like numb to it, yeah.
Yeah, you like, this is what my body does, and also just like learning about all like the reasons it's there and what it does, like you come to appreciate it, like oh my God, like it has like 6 functions, like your vagina feeds its own dead skin cells every 4 hours to its pet bacteria and then like flushes them out. Like,
amazing.
yeah, I'm just like really cool. So cool. Like it's like the like baseline wetness of a vagina, like just like the moisture in it is filtered blood that your vaginal walls filter, like super filtered blood. Like I just got an appreciation for it. And just like also another element of it was like I became the Pussypedia girl, which meant like everybody was gonna tell me, everyone tells me about their pussy stuff.
Yeah. Should be set up at a picnic table outside after the event. Yeah.
Yeah. Ask me anything about your pussy or like show it to me. It's fine. Like
that's what happens after 11 p.m.
But I had a lot of conversations about a lot of people's pussies and like what was wrong with it.
Yeah.
And oh my God, just like get inundated with something, you kind of get over it. But also like when I actually started like really doing research and realizing like, okay, like 7 of the 10 studies about female ejaculation are conflating like the ejaculate that's produced in the periurethral glands and like squirt juice, which are like 2 extremely different things. And like, why are these studies conflating these 2 things? Like, you get really like understand how little information there is and how carelessly the science can be done. And the reason I think that that's a way that gender narratives influence science is that I think this narrative that like the pussy is a mystery and cannot be known makes people irresponsible when they go to do research about it, because they're like, oh.
Or like make the bearers of the pussy not feel like they can learn anything about it.
Totally. So after becoming like really like aware of how fucked up this is, just like a lot of my shame was replaced with like indignation. Like,
good. That's the turn that you want. That's the turn. Wait, one of the things that I think that happens in the book is you never use the word women. Is that right? Can you talk about that choice?
Well, a lot of people who have pussies aren't women.
Truth.
So,
yeah.
We wanted it to be for them too. And also, a lot of people with pussies who aren't women and women that don't have pussies as well. So it's just like kind of a dated term for talking about people who have pussies. Like one time, like the very beginning of this project, I like posted on Facebook, like, what's the word for like people with pussies? Someone was like, I think that's it.
Pussies. Yeah.
People with pussies. So we wanted to be gender inclusive. I wanted to be gender inclusive, that's why.
How was, you're very good in the book at saying, like, at so many turns, you're like, this applies to some people, but not all people. This applies to trans people, not binary people. This applies to, and there's one quote that you have from like a trans queer doctor who's doing hormone therapy with patients, and she's actually saying, I think it's pretty detrimental to not use the word woman.
Yeah, which was like really surprising and amazing, and like, yeah, she said, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say you can't use the word women when you're talking about pussies, because a lot of people's experiences of their pussies have been very shaped by the fact that they were women. And there's just, I mean, her main point was like that there's just not enough dialogue going on,
right.
Which was like amazing to hear, because, I mean, doing this book put me in a position of being like super on the defense of people being like, oh, you're writing a book about pussies, like, is it inclusive? You know, like, and it was like, whoa, yeah, it is, and I hope, I'm trying really hard to make it inclusive, but yeah, I super agree with her, like, it's not dialogue anymore, it's like dogma, it's like people are really scared to ask questions, really, really scared to say the wrong thing, and like, if you like, don't just like immediately regurgitate like the party line. You can get canceled, and that's fascism, right?
Yes. And this is a good part. Yeah, clap it out. This is a good point to say we're taking questions. So I'd like to start incorporating in questions from the audience as you have them. There's 2 microphones, one on either side of the stage. And so if you step up to the microphone, I'll be able to see you, and we can call on you. And all questions are welcome, and you won't be canceled. So while everyone gets their sea legs and decides if they're going to approach the bench with a question, I'll ask a few more. One of the things that you said was a point of pride for you was like digging into the PMS studies.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I would like to preface this by saying I woke up like sobbing and like cried through my shower this morning and then got my period today later, but like there's almost no evidence for PMS. Like, it's really crazy. Like, once you adjust for all the really like heinously gendered ways that PMS research was conducted when the concept was established, and you like go back and look at studies that didn't prime their subjects, that didn't cherry pick their subjects, that had like, you know, just good research designs. It looks like about 17% of people have PMS. I mean, and that's not the physical symptoms, like those repeatedly show up, like the bloating, like all that, but being like irritable and sad and stuff. And one of my favorite studies was this one that like showed that women, people with pussies who identified as like more typically feminine, experienced worse PMS. Yeah.
I don't even know what to do with that.
I know.
Yeah.
Which the authors, and this is not something that like they're like that study showed, but they kind of like pose it, and I loved it. It was like, well, maybe it's because like femininity doesn't allow you to like show bad feelings, like say like I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm angry, like whatever. So that's like their opportunity to like get those feelings out and still be like feminine, which I thought was fascinating. But yeah, I mean, PMS is used to like, you know, say women shouldn't hold office because they'll be irrational, and, you know, just this like trope of hysteria, the hysterical woman, PMS, like it's such a useful narrative for the patriarchy. And
but it's also interesting because you like just said you woke up you cried waking up, blah blah blah, and so while the studies might not say there's PMS, you would say today you experienced something.
Yeah, but I think that it has a lot to do with like, we have the concept in our brain that it exists, that it's a thing. You've woken up enough times after, you know, having a meltdown, you get your period, you're like, oh, I got the meltdown because I was PMSing, and then the narrative becomes realer, and like we know that our narratives can change the way our bodies work, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think it's this amazing thing that just like
you kind of say
realer.
something in the book that's like, even though the studies don't validate it, there is a validation to it, right? Like either that hormones do change and it floods the brain in different ways.
Yeah, we know that changing hormones change our moods in a lot of different ways. And like weird things like facial recognition of like feeling, like when you're in the luteal phase, like you think other people are angry more often, like can't like read people's faces as well, but
that's just to underline that's like one of the phases of the menstrual cycle is the luteal phase, and what Zoe's saying is like there's research that shows you actually read other people more negatively when you're in that phase.
But there's also like really cool things about it, like you're more able to accurately identify your own emotions. Like that's so cool, like you're more self-aware. You know, so like, what if we reframed PMS as not like, oh, you're like bitchy, crazy, and irrational, like feeling what you've been not paying attention to, or like
That is very interesting. Yeah, and I do think that the cultural note of like, if you don't have access or you're not allowed to feel the feelings. If you get an excuse to feel the feelings, you're like, oh, this is my moment. We have a question at the mic over here. Thank you.
Hi, Sophia.
Hi. I love Zoe. I love Maria, and this topic is so important to me.
Can I just say this is your mentor, right? One of your mentors? Yeah, right here.
We're friends. We're friends. The first time Zoe and I met, we talked for like 4 hours, so I'm going to try to keep my question brief because I have so many things that I want to talk about. But one of the things that I think is so powerful and necessary and exciting about this book is that for so long, people with pussies have been gaslit about their bodies. Mm-hmm. And to have a place where you can go and find out that you're just as desirous as people with penises, you're just as orgasmic, you have just as much interest in pleasure and fantasy, and that all of these things about you are completely normal. And the structure that we've been taught about consistently is shaming and gaslighting and problematic. Like we talk about hormones, I mean, the fact that women menstruate has been used to exclude women from clinical medical trials. Mm-hmm. It was only necessary to include women in medical trials since 1993. So whether or not PMS is real or whether we feel emotional or not, like a bigger issue is that we're dying more because the drugs are affecting us differently and our bodies aren't studied and our complexity isn't valued. So one of the things that I think is amazing about the book, there's just so many, but like every diagram that you see of the anatomy, you actually see the internal clitoris as part of it. I recently had a baby, and it was so interesting that I could learn about every different possible fruit my baby would turn into week by week, and every little fucking minutia of cell, but I didn't see my clitoris anywhere in this whole fucking anatomy. Mm-hmm. I mean, can you imagine, like, diagrams in doctor's offices with no penises, and, like, paintings and sculptures with, like, no penises everywhere, and just fucking hanging balls and, like, no penises? So I'm just saying, this is actually so radical. It's so timely. There's so many books out there about vaginas, including a new book that just came out recently that's getting a lot of praise called The Vagina Bible. That's not even about the vagina.
That book sucks.
I'm so grateful that Zoe's making this book, and I really encourage all of you guys to read it, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, Sophia.
I will say the drawing, the anatomical drawing of the clit, the book is at the bookstore. At the very least, you should flip through and see. It's like an amazing. It's so much bigger internally than I ever realized, and it has this shape that's almost like an airplane or a bird. Like it's
like a tubby penguin.
Or a tubby penguin.
Or like a penguin doing the breaststroke.
A penguin doing the breaststroke. It's really great. Do we have another question or a picture taker?
A little bit of both.
Oh, great. Do it.
Hi, Zoe. Hi, Molly. First of all, congratulations. This is pretty cool.
Yes.
I've known Zoe since college, and this is not what I saw for you. But it's way cooler. So congrats. I want to know what you think is the most important chapter in the book. Ooh. And what your favorite chapter is. Maybe they're the same, maybe they're not.
So favorite chapter of yours and what you think is the most important chapter.
I think if you're only going to read one chapter, clitoris.
Nice. All right. How come?
My favorite chapter, I think, is the birth control contraception chapter. It's like a long list of methods. It's boring methods, contraception methods, and how they work.
But Zoe makes it interesting. Not boring.
But at the end, I tried to address this issue where a lot of people have really intense reactions to hormonal birth control, but study after study comes out saying there's no side effects. Because I had a really bad reaction to hormonal birth control, like really bad, and my doctor, talking about gaslighting, was like, this is the most studied drug on the planet. There's no side effects. And I was like, I don't know, I just cried over some chicken, so I don't think I'm okay.
I think something's up.
It's like just starting college, and I was like, I don't think so. But anyway, I tried really hard to solve that mystery, and I think that I did a good job. So that's my favorite.
The birth control chapter, I even read some of it out loud because it was just like, you talk about the studies that were done, like going to Puerto Rico and just testing high doses of birth control down there, or it was illegal to do it in Massachusetts, so we went to other places, and it made me feel bad for like using birth control now, even though it's totally different. I just thought, oh my God, this is built on the back of so much coercion and abuse.
Yes. That chapter is called The Other Kind of Birth Control, and it's about the history of forced sterilizations and testing of birth control in this country on mostly people of color and disabled people, and it's like, ooh, it's so scary. It's like, oh my God. And that story, I think, is the best case study I've found that like helps people understand why intersectionality is important, because like while literally hundreds of thousands of people with pussies were being forcibly sterilized in this country, like 30 yearly, no, not 30, wait, what year is it? Like
50s, 60s, 70s, what was it? Is that what?
up to like the 70s.
Yeah.
Now, the National Organization of Women like lobbied against this huge success that some other activist groups had managed to have in getting these waiting periods instated before someone's uterus could be ripped out.
Mm-hmm.
So they were like, no, we want to have our uteruses out like whenever we want. And it was like, no, wait, but we're doing this because there's like this hundreds of thousands of people being forcibly sterilized every year, and they didn't even know. Like they didn't.
And forcible sterilization is taking out the uterus.
Stealing someone's uterus, yes, without permission.
Mm-hmm.
Or a lot of what they were doing is saying you can't get your welfare benefits unless you get your uterus out.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it makes me want to vomit. It's horrible. So that's why, that's what happens if you don't have an intersectional approach to your activism and your feminism, right? Like,
yeah. Do we have another question on the side? Okay.
Hi, another proud baby mama. As the book's agent, hi, Zoe.
That's good. Out yourself, yeah.
Hello. A lot of the most exciting parts of our conversations of late have been about what it looks like for Pussypedia to translate into other countries. And the conversations I'm having with editors around what it means for this project to enter into dialogue with and meet local feminist discourse on the ground. And a lot of our personal conversations, though, which is really any conversation, otherwise it's not worth having, have to do with the ways in which oftentimes US activism, whether it's feminism or fill-in-the-blank issue, tends to impose the dichotomies here, or the binary thinking, or the framework that is US-centric, Anglo-centric, onto other parts of the world. And you and I, you live in Mexico City, I spend a lot of time there. We talk a lot about the ways in which that produces so many blind spots in the feminist discourse here. Can you tell us a little bit about, having lived in Mexico, the fact that the project was born in Mexico, the fact that the significance that Maria's art has in Mexico? What is something that you've learned either from Mexico City, from Latin America as a large, in their feminist movements, discourses, that people interested in feminist discourse in the US could stand to be aware of, learn from, listen to?
That's such a great question.
Yeah, I think it's a wildly different context. In Mexico, they're not in the streets saying, we want equal pay. Like, they're saying, stop killing us. And there's a collectivism present there that's, like, I think are like utterly absent from like girl boss feminism. It's like, I'm gonna help you negotiate your salary. Don't like, text me when you get home.
Yeah.
Share your Uber thing with me.
The medallion, yeah, or your
the
status
ride.
where you're at.
Yeah. It's one of the like protest chants is like, the police don't take care of me, my friends do. And they mean that in a way that I don't see here very often. I think feminism here is a lot about like empowering our own individual success. So it also isn't my idea, and I really wish I could give credit to the person whose idea it was, but I was talking to someone, and I don't remember who, and they were like, yeah, like Me Too versus Ni Una Menos. Like Ni Una Menos is the big movement there, which is like not one less, like no more murdering us. And Me Too is like, yeah, Me Too. Like it's way less collective, and it's like about like, this happened to me, and it's like just feels more individualistic, which of course it does because we're here and that's our culture. I don't know what could be applied of that feminism here without just being like, well, stop being so individualistic and like help each other. It sounds really broad, but that's my answer. It's not about like girl boss bullshit and like, you know, I think a lot of feminist spaces here can be like really masturbatory, where it's just like, let's all like dress up in like our cutest outfits and like hang out and like get off on how professionally successful we are. Like I just think that's like a really blind form of feminism.
So when you were writing the book, did you ever feel caught between like, who's my audience? Like if I wrote this chapter for, girls in Latin America, people in Latin America, pussies in Latin America versus in the US versus somewhere else, were you like, did that tear at you in any way, or did a path seem clear?
Well, there's a lot of like practical advice in the book, which is like how to call your health insurance company and find out what kind of STI testing they might pay for and all that stuff. Like I did it for a US audience, and we're hoping to be able to like make that kind of stuff more helpful like in each place that it's published. We don't know if we'll be able to do that. But I think a lot of the stuff that like people here will read and think is for 13-year-olds is actually like for like fully grown adults in Latin America who like have never been told like your vagina's not gross. Like
But I would imagine that there's plenty of people in the States who haven't been told that message either, you know?
Yeah. I live in a bubble where I hope most people have been told that their vaginas aren't gross.
I feel like I live
vaginas aren't gross, you guys.
Vaginas aren't gross. I feel like I live straddle that world of coming from like a very conservative part of the country, like rural Ohio, being raised Catholic, and then going to do a series like Gonads, where like I was talking about like what sounds I make when I masturbate to like scientists on the phone, and you're like, whoa, this is. Like, I have a lot of different worlds in my head right now, you know? Like, so, I don't know, I think a lot of people are having, like you said, not everybody can get into the science and, like, read the scientific papers, and so if we had the luxury of doing that, you know, through various professional endeavors, but if you can't, then this book would be quite provocative.
Yeah. I don't, like, the bubble, I don't have, like, I don't even remember anymore, like, I don't know where the bubble ends. Like, I don't know what's normal anymore, because I've just been around freaks for so long. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's probably going to be a lot more shocking than I thought it would be.
That's what we're here for. We have time for maybe one or two more questions, so I see one person at the mic. Give it to us.
Hey, Zoe.
Hey.
I'm curious with like things like you researching squirting and not finding that much. I'm sure you found a lot of topics you wanted to cover that you couldn't find that much information about, scientifically or even culturally. How did you deal with that? Like, what did you do to gather enough information for different things?
I mean, I looked at PubMed, like, science database. And when there wasn't stuff, or when the studies that were there were contradicted each other that just wrote that into the book. Like, well, here's some things that science seems confused about. Like, do our periurethral glands have holes next to the urethra or not? Are there 1 or are there 5? Do 70%, 30%, or like 80% of people have periurethral glands? And like, why the fuck isn't it 100? Because it seems pretty fucking unlikely that it's not 100. And there's no answer to this, which is pretty shameful because there would never ever be these kinds of questions about how many men have glands that produce, like prostates. It's the prostate. The periurethral glands are the prostate. And like, they don't even know where the ejaculate, what hole it comes out of.
In women, in
pussies.
Yeah.
Like, what? So I just wrote that into the book and I didn't know. I was like, I can't find it. Sorry, guys.
So what percentage of the book do you feel like is like multiple different answers to one question?
I hope like
I was like all of it.
almost all of it.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey,
Final question. We're
final
ready.
question? Awesome. I was curious how writing Pussypedia and the relationships you've developed have altered or permeated the way that you interact with the world. So I find that like when I talk about Pussypedia, right, like it's almost like a conscious raising group. Like, okay, what is that? And then like the sphere of like intersectionality and like so much that is associated when you say Pussypedia in the project. So I was curious if you could, one, name things, maybe how it's altered the way that you interact with the world, or how you've heard about how it's altered other people's ways of living in the world. Yeah.
Hannah was my extremely amazing research assistant.
Hannah. Go, Hannah.
I think I'm so down the rabbit hole that I don't like know. I don't know how.
A story about a guy you met in Mexico.
Oh, that I was, yeah, the first galley I had in my hands, I was like standing on the street holding it, crying like, oh my book. And this guy was playing music, like busking behind me, playing, and he was like, like, what is that? I want to see that. I don't know, I think that it's like, I mean, it has made me less shameful about my body, but I was never shameful about talking about pussies, and like actually really wanted to always. But I don't know. I mean, for example, like when I say Pussypedia, like pussy this, pussy that, whatever. Like some people like run the face. They're like, oh my god, she's saying pussy. But when they see me taking it really seriously. They're like, oh yeah, okay, like we're taking this seriously now. Like,
If they're like, oh, well, she's taking it seriously. We'll take it seriously.
yeah, like rise to the occasion, and it gave me pretty like, maybe it improved my expectations of people because I saw a lot of people rise to the occasion that I didn't think would, and that's cool.
That's such a good ending. Everyone, give it up for Zoe and Pussypedia.